thank you for presenting me. Thank you everyone for having me second time after 2 years on the Zgodovina na Špici. Last time I talked about self-managing in culture. Today I'll talk about something completely different. It's part of my postdoc, as Yuri said already, in a much bigger, actually, now the new research of performing Mediterranean masculinities. I've been working on this project for 2 years, and so far when I presented, I gave really straightforward story of who Galebovi were, like this exactly. So they were not on the move; the other people were on the move and coming to them. But since I've read quite a lot and I gained much of the new sources, I decided today to maybe complicate it a bit of my life, so you will not get maybe what you expected, like this straightforward story of how they seduced Swedish women. But actually, I will try to, during this presentation, explain how actually a mythology of a galeb was created, and bear with me, this is the first time I'm trying that, so hopefully it will be fruitful. But before I start, I've learned in the last 2 years that, let's say, people younger than 25 years old don't really know who Galebovi were. And what I've heard that especially in Slovenia, people don't know who Galebovi were. So the literal translation would be seagulls, but since I'm a historian, I don't work on the animal seagulls, but actually on people seagulls. So that's the name for, as Yuri said before, for local men from the Adriatic, mostly from Dalmatia, who in summer months half professionally engage in seducing foreign women, mostly coming from Western and Northern European countries. As I said, semi-professional, some of them did gain some financial or other economic benefit in the form of gift giving. This is a topic I will partially grasp to, while the others were actually trying to find a way how to satisfy their sexual needs in the time of more conservative era, especially in the Adriatic. So some of the concepts I work on are like the question of, can we call them as a Latin lovers from the mass tourism era? Because of, as you probably know, since the 1950s, the whole the northern Mediterranean, European Mediterranean part was actually turning into the mass tourist destination, especially for richer Northern and Western Europeans, and to a certain extent, tourists from USA. On the other hand, they quietly well fitted in the imaginary of the Mediterranean other, which are in European kind of anthropology seen as semi-exotic, white but non-quite, that's the other expression, of some men who are actually maybe not that rich, but they are really temperamental. So there is this like orientalizing image of what these men are supposed to be, especially in comparison with these much more Protestant conservative men from Northern and Western Europe. They are like, of course, like physical traits that are ascribed to them: black hair, strong muscles, tanned, sometimes with golden necklace and so on, which is actually part of the imaginary presented sometimes in lots of movies, sometimes in popular press, but also, of course, on the ground. Some researchers, Greece was mostly, research says that they were rooted in the patriarchal societies of Mediterranean countries, and of course the foreign expectation of semi-exotic natural sexuality on the other. Especially here where we have like this strong, I will come soon to that, this strong preconception of Mediterranean as a place of really strong shame and honor concept, where women should have like this Virgin Mary or around them, on the other side of men who are like hypersexual. And we can trace these Latin lovers from the mass tourism era in whole range of European, mostly European Mediterranean countries. So for instance, in Yugoslavia, they were called Galebovi. In Italy, they were called Papagali. In Greece, they were called Kamakia. In Spain, they were called sometimes picadores, like the ones who are fighting the bulls. They existed in France, although I haven't discovered what was their name. Even in Portugal, in the south of Portugal, they also didn't have a name. They had just one person, Zezé Camarinha, who was like the epitome of the Portuguese side of Galebovi. So we can see like this whole range of behavior of young Mediterranean men across the Mediterranean era, of course influenced by the moral and hegemonic masculinity of their respective country, depending on the ideology, the type of the role of religion inside the society, and so on. Here I put a few photos of them for just to get the idea of how they were presented. As you can see, they were mostly in speedos, quite openly entertaining foreign women. And this person on the right, someone will recognize him, he's not actually Galeb, he's Mishokovac. My favorite singer, and my mission is to just include him in every presentation I have. But also I think this photo he's from Šibenik, from Dalmatia, and he like celebrated himself with these like really Dalmatian masculine like love songs. So I think especially in this early age he's also quite a good example of how Galebovi were imagined in public space. And as you can see, he has like this golden cross around golden chain with cross around his neck and very nice chest hair. Let's put it there. There are like lots of interviews with them, especially in soft erotica, which was blossoming in Yugoslavia from '68 onwards, and they were usually anonymous or with like just initials or just first names, so without proper names and their photos. But they really like to talk about themselves. And here is another photo of one Galeb with 5 foreign women. They really like to describe themselves in a really stereotypical way. So, for instance, one of them said, "We are well-built lads with bronze tan. We sell it as a natural color, but is usually a result of spreading petroleum over our bodies and persistent sunbathing in recess. Alongside skin color, muscles, and curly hair, our seduction gear includes white teeth, for which we choose seaweed, swimming briefs, a small gondola for 2, a short vessel, and a broad smile, which we disseminate along the Adriatic coast from Koper to Ulcinj." So here they also want to actually state that it's all Yugoslav phenomena and not just like smaller Dalmatian, but in the end there was this because of the building of the Mediterranean image, which you can read in the book. Actually, we can see that the Dalmatia was the center for all these behaviors of these young men. So as we can see, like especially like this idea of bronze tan. I mean, this is the time of mass media where like there is a really strong European and American like actually communication through popular culture and the idea of what is expected, how good-looking men from the Mediterranean era looks like. So even the guys who were not actually like naturally dark-skinned, they knew it is expected from them. So you have to start sunbathing already in March to actually like be ready for foreign women when they come, because this is what they expect. In other presentations, I talk a lot about how actually these foreign women perceive them, and there is like lots of like this Orientalist discourse about how they're like really temperamental. They don't accept no. They're so exciting. Our men at home. This guy, one woman said, this guy immediately recognized I have a new haircut, while my husband, because lots of them were married, these women actually never recognizes. I feel like a proper woman here. They know how to seduce. So you can really see like lots of actually inscribed, meaning that it doesn't have to be like that in reality, because of course like there are like different people. So there is like this interplay of performing and expectations, which is basically what I'm mostly interested in. And then what I actually try to do is, when I read all these sources, which are usually coming from this popular press, to try to fit them in what is existing about mostly Mediterranean anthropology from the 60s till today, even though it's highly criticized. But basically the idea of how Mediterranean masculinity is framed. The first one is, which I mentioned before, like sexual morality, concept of honor and shame, which is like really basically the basis of Mediterranean anthropology since the 1960s until the 1990s and the postmodernist turn, where of course honor is usually, both honor and shame are much more important for women, to keep their virginity and have just one life partner with whom they will marry and have family, while of course men have to keep the women's honor. And of course don't really have much shame. On the other hand, we have a strong influence of religion, especially Catholic religion, but as we can see with Greece and to a certain extent Turkey, there are also other religions where actually have really strong influence of sexual purity and trying not to engage in sexual intercourses before getting married, also being quite polite and respectful towards other gender. However, on the other hand, we have really strong male chauvinist culture, which is especially can be seen today when I talk with students about my Galebovi. They usually say it's a sexual harassment, while in the 60s and 70s was seen as a showing that you're a proper man. It was not perceived in a way of sexual harassment, except in some other. For instance, in Italy, it was actually illegal to harass women on the beach, but it didn't stop them. Then we have commitment to an image of manliness, because it's part of their personal honor and reputation. We can connect it with the second one, which is expression of virility. In lots of these, in lots of languages of the Mediterranean countries, you actually have like these expressions to have balls, to actually have being a proper man, and actually the expressions of virility to be able to perform sexually and satisfy a woman is a really big part. For instance, in Greece and some other countries, we even have like lots of souvenirs in a form of penis, and actually like this idea that goes back, of course, to Greek and Roman time becomes a part of actually the reputation. To be a man, what does it mean? It means that you are able to sexually satisfy, but also, of course, impregnate a woman. And then we have public masculinity, which I think it's really interesting, which is that lots of men are performing their masculinity not for other women, but for other men. It's like this internal competition of who is the best, the most popular guy, and of course, in my case, who had the most success during the summer. There are like lots of examples, for instance, in one Croatian movie from 1963, Lito Vilovito, which talks about them, that in like small places, everyone has their own tree, let's say, where they put ticks how many women they slept with in the one summer, and then the one, of course, who has the most ticks after summer, he is like the most popular guy. So like there is lots of bragging and banter between themselves, of course, lots of like sexual banter between themselves, and these are actually the part of what makes Mediterranean masculinity. And of course, as I said, these visual stereotypes of Mediterranean macho, which is ingrained in not just in popular culture, but in culture, of the myth of Don Juan, the Casanova, and so on. We can actually trace it centuries back, and of course with Hollywood and lots of popular movies, it again blossoms from the 1950s on. So I will come back to this slide in the end and see where did I actually find similarities with what the theory says, let's say it like that. To retrace actually the historiography of Galebovi is not that easy, because unfortunately you can't go to archives and find a box that says Galebovi and read about them. So I'm mostly so far focusing on reportages from popular press. As I said, there was like really a lot pornographic and erotic magazines of the time, mostly published in Serbia, then start in Zagreb and Vročikaj in the late 80s in Slovenia, and there, of course, next to the like pure sexual part, there are lots of actually like discussions about also sexual health, about abortion, about sexual morale, what are the expected, like there is also this educational element, and there are also then these like stories, reportages, especially from the summer destinations, where they talk with these kind of women. I also have to do interviews with these men, but I haven't, but I will say what I expect a bit later. So here we have just a few examples of how they are presented, and usually, as I said, they are not named, but and the photos are usually from foreign newspapers, so they are not proper photos of men, as you can see from the composition quality and so on. So now I just extracted few sentences just to see how they were presenting themselves from the newspapers. So from one says, from May until now, I've been with 27 women, out of which 20 were young girls. The other ones were married. They were all foreigners. You know, local girls are out of the question during this hot summer. We save them for winter. The other one says, you know how it is. Guy who changes girlfriends frequently is considered better, more worthy. People talk about him, worship him, and younger guys imitate him. We see like this virility and like this competition between men here. A third one says, I get bored during the summer. I know German and Italian, and I manage with some English as well, so I get by. Foreign girls have nice cars, they're beautiful, and most importantly, they dress attractively. We drive from beach to beach and enjoy ourselves. Of course, we also show up in my friend group, and then we are the center of attention. And the fourth one has like a bit of like a joke, like banter style. So he says, some think we want to demonstrate, prove our masculinity. The more rude ones think we are crazy and belong in a psychiatric ward. For others, our job is dirty and shameful because we charge for love. These are all misconceptions. We are residents of the city, and we only seek to enhance its glory in this way. So basically, some of them, like there is lots of like this discourse that they are like part of tourist propaganda, and that women come to Yugoslav tourist destinations also because they heard that they can have this sort of entertainment included. And there are lots of stories, I will come back to them. You can really see how this mythology is spread because similar stories about these women who came to a certain town and no one was seducing them and then they left and wrote an angry letter to hotel, you can really see how every year it appears in different town. So of course it could be that it happened a lot, but it actually, I would argue that it's part of the mythology. It's just like these stories that are repeated and just changed a bit in the context, and they should not be taken as a face value, especially because these are just like second-hand reports in popular press and you don't really see these letters and you don't hear these women in that way. And I want to actually focus on one person whose name is Božo Čanić. He had like a nickname called Jerry Cambridge from Dubrovnik. I think he's still alive. He was still alive 2 years ago when I read an interview with him from 2 years ago. I don't know what happened with that interview because I couldn't find it anymore, but he was still alive 2 years ago and had his third wife who was from Finland. So you can see like, as you can see also on the photo, he doesn't really, when you would look at him and you would look the photos before, you would not say, oh yeah, this is galeb. So this is where my story becomes more complicated. Like there is another layer to this. We cannot just look at this really beautiful man and say, okay, this is who fit in these, all these inscribed Mediterranean anthropology. We have to look at different types of pictures. I see some nods, yeah, he could be a galeb, but I will not say who is nodding. So short story, he was born in 1941. He studied tourism because, of course, he was from Dubrovnik, but he gave up and he ended up working actually in the academic library of Dubrovnik. So even though he didn't have like really big formal education, we could say that he was an intellectual. He worked there, he read a lot, he was well read, he was well cultured. So he had like, he acted a bit as a tourist guide, so he had like this highbrow, let's say, knowledge that he could also use for seducing tourists instead just like showing off on the beach and so on. But what's more interesting is actually that he was an amateur writer and he wrote a series of stories of adventures of one galeb for Chic, the Serbian erotic magazine, where he described, we'll come to that soon, where he actually described his successes with different foreign women. And of course, he was a galeb. Probably if he married 3 times, in the end, he married a Finnish woman until the very late in his life. I hope he will still be alive next year if I find him and I can interview him. So it will be really interesting to see how it matches with what I read about him in the 70s. But before I continue with Božo Čanić, I also discovered a video of him that he gave in 1971 for a TV documentary series called Ljudi, People, where from TV Belgrade, where they actually like interviewed like different people, and one of them, and he's actually presented as a galeb, is with Božo Čanić. And I even made subtitles, so I hope you will. It's 15 minutes long. I will show you just a bit.
Nego da vam ispričam kako je recimo izgledao jedan radni dan. Mi rećemo stara, dobra vremena. Da bi možda shvatili razliku kako je to danas zaskručeno. Ja sam radio ujutro 2 sata, poslije 2 sata sam na plažu, peške preko ramena, sakrije mišiće, intelektualni, Špici. Nema to fizički, kako si ti izgledao na plaži, nema to reći. Čak možda naprotiv. Razvijeni muškarci nisu prednost. Recimo, da ne dođe mnogo, upatim jednu i dogovorim se za uvečer. Ja rećem kako ćemo plesa, a ona da bi išla na koncert, jel? O, kako ne? Ja govorim, večeras je Beethoven u C-duru, u Knežovome dvoru, ja govorim, krasno će vam to biti, on ja se već postavim, ja sam također mislio ići na koncert večeras, a meni se spava na koncertu, na pili, lujo, violinu, cijelo večer ću da. Ali moraš malo je prekrpati. Postaje, ja dođem u Jadrana, sjedem tamo sa strane i narajcam se na nekakvu švabicu. daleko hoće stići do njih. Daleko što oni svi galebovi samo čekaju prvi znak, stoje ko na štartu trke od 100 metara. Sjede na popuzice i samo čekaju kad će tamo udariti prvi takt da trči. Mislim se ja htio bi doći prvi, jer ako ne dođem prvi do njih, gotovo je više. Hamu, mome prijatelju od trubadura, dam znak. On dođe tam mikrofona, oni svi sjedno, zdravljaju se i samo čeka kad počnem svirati. U to se ja dignem, već prije muzike, svi za mnom gledaju, misle da ću ja ići plesat, jel? Međutim, ja napravim kod idem u gledam sam sasvim drugu stranu. Kad se nađem upravo blizu stola, one šabice na koju se naumio, Hamo počne pjevat, oni se dignu, međutim kasno, ja se već tu poklonim se u stilu Luja 16. Pokupim je, plešemo, Hamo pjeva tamo nekakve romantične pjesme, Marucela, Mare. Ja je stisnem uho, šapćem polako, prevađam joj. I stari onaj štos, Hamo pjeva, bača mi, a ja pitan nju, znaš ti šta znači bača mi? Kaže, ne znam. A to ti kaže, ja znači kiss me. Ona, kiss me, ona ja je poljubim. Gotovo, ako se nasmije, pola postavu gotovo. Ako se naljuti, gurne me ili reče, ili pokaže, mislim, nekim gesom kako. Jer to nije drago, nema tu postaviš.
So there is more. There is 15 minutes more, but like I don't have so much time. But it's on YouTube, so if you're interested, without subtitles, if you're interested, you can see the whole video. So when I discovered this video, I was like really excited. Great, I have like these personal stories. And then it was like 2 years ago, I forgot about that video, and then I found his Adventures of a Galeb that he wrote for Chick and Reporter. And then I came back to the video and I realized it's the same stories. So they're like again like so, and both these stories. So they're like two rounds of the stories. First time he wrote for Chick in 1971, and then for Reporter in 1983. They're the same stories. It's like a bit changed names, something, but they're basically always the same stories. So here I took from Reporter from 1983. The two stories, different stories, which are actually the same stories that we just heard. But as we can see in the first one, he says they're going on a Mozart concert, and then of course everything happens, he's really bored, but what sacrifices the Galeb has to make. And the other story is the story where he's has a deal with Dubrovački trubaduri, but here it's Johnny at the piano, and there was Hamu who was singing, and there was a German girl, here is an English girl. So these are like, of course, small details. But it actually made me think, okay, are these stories actually true, or are these just some legends that are like retold over and over again? As you could see him, he has a sort of humoristic tone to himself. So can I actually rely on these sources, like as a proper stories that were told? Like, was this a real behavior of a Galeb, or is this something that actually tells us more about discourse of Galebovi? So how to actually I approach my topic, and this is what I'm trying to actually find out, and this is, I think, where the story becomes interesting, because of course, like non-academic people, they just want to hear the fun stories. But as an academic, as a historian, I actually want to and need to find out what's in the background, how these Mediterranean masculinities are formed, how do they actually like fit in the reality, and how do they fit in this whole preconceived theory. And here, yes, sorry, I was told in the United States I have to give a trigger warning for naked women, so trigger warning for naked women. So here the photos from these stories. The first two upper ones are from the first one in 71, and here you can see like there are like included some real artifacts. So there is a postcard, and here is like his diary where he wrote the addresses of all these. So we have like this moment of reality, while this second round of these stories from 1983 are actually all named by just simply by a foreign name, and they're of course always different nationalities. So we have Claudia, Lucia Mona, and so on and so on. And then after all these like 6 or 7 stories that were published in Chick, there was usually an interview, real interview with him, where he would explain actually what was the background. And he admits that these stories are not completely true, even though if you just watch the interview, you would think, okay, this happened. But there are actually like variations of stories that he heard, some that he made, some of that he over-exaggerated, of course, for the literacy aspect and so on. But then in the interview, one of the interviews, he actually says that while he was an active galeb, he wrote as a joke a manual for young galebov in one afternoon. This booklet of about 20 pages is a true example of underground publishing. This is the journalist who is saying. Initially, it was photocopied in a few hundred copies, and then some graphic workers, without mentioning the name of the printing house, printed it in hundreds of copies. And he says, it was all a joke, I had nothing to do that day, so I sat down on a chair, took some paper and wrote that manual, so we would have something to joke about. Everything was covered professionally, seriously, scientifically. So he really wanted to give the idea that this is like a proper guide, like, supported by the facts, but actually it was a part of the joke that he had with some of his friends, and soon he found out that it was circulating around Dubrovnik and Dalmatia. I didn't include it here, but he says, for instance, one of the jokes were how men can enlarge his penis so he can perform as a proper galeb. And according to him, then he heard stories from different hotels that actually men were taking these stories as true and putting something on their private parts, and of course it didn't work. But basically his conclusion was like, you cannot make yourself galeb, you have to be one. This is a part of your identity. So even here he actually I think he gives me really interesting moment, is the moment of joke, actually, of humor. So why do these short stories matter for me and for my research? So one moment, especially like erotic stories, featured plots that could happen to everyone. Like there is this idea of I bumped into a woman and we seduced. So there is this idea that that maybe it could happen to you if you come to the Adriatic. But I think this part of humor and anecdote, which actually fits in this idea of Mediterranean banter, is really important, because it says a lot about how these stories are exaggerated and we cannot take them at face value when they see them. But again, they're a necessary feature for creating its masculinity model. So even though they're not really true, they do support the idea of creating hegemonic masculinity and what is the best way that you can be a man in Mediterranean context. However, again, how do I deal with truthfulness of personal narratives, and can we actually talk about reality of Galebovi 60 years later? Can I find what actually happened? Or is it maybe better to understand how mythology was created and how actually one performed his masculinity, both for foreign women, but also for his peers, and actually, like, especially in the winter time when nothing happens. So these are like the interaction I'm now mostly interested in. And to support this thing, actually, there are two stories that I wanted to a year ago investigate, but now I see they're more complex. The first one is the existence of so-called Galebovi associations. So there are reports, especially the first one is from Kaštela near Split, the report that actually local men made a proper association, like NGO of Galebovi, that at every certain moment in the summer, one man had to be on call in the tourist center when the woman comes, to be able to offer his services, and this is widely reported in lots of media in 64. But then, for instance, Božo Čanić says that's not true, it was all just for fun, and that they sometimes actually like to invent these stories to amuse newspaper journalists who would usually interview them, and they wanted to see how far they can go for the journalists to actually report these kind of stories. So I think this is also one interesting moment, again, for me as a researcher, but also for you if you read these kind of things, to actually see what is the part of the reality and what is part of the banter, and actually the second-hand knowledge, the things that are printed in media. And the second one is, of course, payment for sex and romance, which is a bit more complicated because it also connects with prostitution, which was illegal in Yugoslavia, and it was usually connected with women, and it was seen as highly immoral. While with men, it's a bit more complicated. First, because it's not a proper prostitution, it's usually gift-giving. So it's usually these men, especially in the early 60s, there are lots of course, anonymous reports how men received jeans, jackets, like lots of other gifts, invitations to visit these women abroad, being paid for dinner, like all these things that could, for instance, today be associated with some gigolos or as some theories call them, romantic entrepreneurs. And there are like lots of like these reports where they actually say that these men are actually being paid to seduce, especially richer and older ladies from Germany, Austria, and England. On the other hand, Božo Čanić, of course, says that it didn't happen and that he would even like spend so much money. He said, considering how much money I've spent on women in my life, I could have afforded the best prostitute from America every week for that amount. So he says that he wasn't. Of course, like this is a question I don't think, to come back to my interviews that I'm kind of getting ready to do next year, I don't think anyone will, especially from today's perspective, admit that they had sex with someone for jeans, because it sounds like really, not something to brag about. But so it's a kind of a thing. But I think in this way, like there are so many reports from men saying they did receive gifts that I would be inclined. But as you can see, we get like really different accounts in stories what was actually happening. So to go back to one of the first slides, so what do I find like from all this theory in my sources? There is partially this sexual morality, the concept of honor and shame. Lots of young men actually say that they do engage in sexual relations with foreign women because local women were not available, because they could not lose their virginity before marriage, especially in the 60s and 70s. It's a bit changed, but basically that this is there are double standards basically, and that this is the only way they can have some sexual relations before marriage, and that it's actually widely accepted from their families. In these reports, I didn't really see a strong influence of religion, which might be also just a part of how mainstream press works, because it's a socialist country. So even if there is an influence, maybe you should not report it or say that much in a positive way or negative way, because it's a socialist country. So I think, because I will work also in comparison with Italy and Portugal, I'm curious how to see in these two countries, which were like publicly and ideologically Catholic, to see how it plays there. We could see lots of male chauvinist culture, of course. We didn't really see this deeply committed image of manliness, and I think the best image is the Božo Čanić, who says that the appearance doesn't matter, you don't have to have muscles, he doesn't really have hair already here. So we can see that this image of manliness, it's not maybe that crucial as actually have a good talkative way and some part of charm to seduce women. Of course, we do have this expression of virility where you compete with other men and you are the more popular as you are most successful. And of course, this public masculinity where men perform in front of and for other men. There is lots of bragging and banter. There is like definitely this humoristic part that I have to include and think about in my research, and there are some stereotypes of Mediterranean macho, gigolo, Don Juan, Casanova, but mostly in just like naming them. So there are like lots of these titles of these articles are like Yugoslav Casanovas, our Don Juans, but you don't really see the connection, the traces with like this idea of traditional Mediterranean men. And instead of conclusion, I put again, not Mišo Kovač, but Božo Čanić, just to remind you how the real galeb actually, one of the real galebs actually looked like. So I think that personal narratives help us in understanding a specific phenomenon such as galebovi. It challenges these preconceived Mediterranean traits through anthropology, which was already highly criticized anyway from the 90s. I think instead of trying to find reality and what really happened, the analysis of discourse and how these masculinities were shaped and performed is much more important than actually what really happened on the ground. And finally, of course, the comparative perspective, actually how much ideology plays in this. How ideology is really, is ideology important in making a socialist galeb, where there is like this still like at least proclaimed equality of gender, putting more emphasis on love than lust and like these kind of things, which is like really propagated strongly in the same erotic magazines. Does this actually influence like this more gentler and gentlemanier, let's say, approach to women than, for instance, in Italy, where, as I said, there was a law that was forbidding to approach unknown women on the beach. And I'll stop here and I'll give you some moments to reflect, and then I think we have some time for questions. Thank you very much.